Hi, this is Tod Mack here at Maryland International Raceway in Budds Creek, Maryland, with showcase sports coverage of the Mountain Motor Nationals, the world's fastest pro stock drag race. Our coverage tonight is sponsored in part by Speed Unlimited, your in-stock speed shop. The Mountain Motor Nationals has become the nation's premier racing event for the pro stock drag racing class and has drawn the cream of the crop of the pro racers over the years. Tonight should be no exception, with many of the top drivers from around the country beginning to filter into the big pit area. In addition to the pro stockers, tonight's race will feature the popular Super Stakes class of racing, which includes a wide variety of cars that will be competing on a handicap ET bracket rules basis. We'll be back with a quick rundown of the colorful history of the Mountain Motor Nationals and a look at the rules governing both categories of competition after these messages.
Speed Unlimited.
As some of the early arrivals begin their time trial and practice runs, let's talk about the cars we'll be seeing tonight. The Pro Stock class featured at the Mountain Motor Nationals is a class comprised of some of the most sophisticated racing machinery in the world. The high-tech, expensive machinery is thinly veiled in plastic disguises of standard U.S. production automobiles that accounts for its great popularity among the highly partisan fans. The Ford, Chevy, Olds, Mercury, Pontiac, and Plymouth fans will become very vocal when their heroes pull to the starting line. The chassis of the cars are lightweight chrome moly tubing with lightened sheet metal and fiberglass bodies. The engines are highly modified production engines delivering from 1,000 to 1,100 horsepower, coupled to 4-speed planetary racing transmissions. The cost to build one of these pro stockers with the state-of-the-art equipment is around $65,000 to $70,000 for openers, with probably an equal amount of support equipment and spare parts required. In the jargon of the racing world, the Mountain Motor is a term describing a huge displacement engine that doesn't necessarily conform to the strict rules that govern races held by the major sanctioning bodies. The term is a throwback to the bootlegging days in the mountains of the Carolinas and Kentucky, when the rum runners' survival depended on having a car faster than the revenuers. To stay out of jail, these bootleg cars became the forerunners of today's race cars with their huge Carolina mountain motors. The Mountain Motor Nationals was created as an opportunity for the racers to throw away the rule book once a year and use those big mountain motors that were outside the strict rules of the sanctioned body events. When it came to the birth of one of the most popular races in the country, the Mountain Motor Nationals made room for the cheater motors. Moving into the pro class now, the field for the Mountain Motor Nationals will be comprised of the 16 quickest cars during the qualifying period. Let's pick up with some of the opening round qualifying as we see local hero Bob Harris. In the far lane, he'll be driving a 1984 Pontiac Trans Am. He's from Chevy Chase, Maryland. In the close lane, the left lane, Lee Dean from Rising Sun, Maryland. A pair of Maryland cars featured in this year's Mountain Motor Nationals. Lee Dean in the close lane in the Sky High car, making his first year of pro stock racing quite a successful one. He made the transition from the sportsman classes at the beginning of the season. And we're looking for big things from one of the former national champions. All right, first round of qualifying is on the starting line. Lee Dean getting off to a big head start. But here comes Bob Harris moving up quickly. And in the first qualifying session, we've got indications that this might be another record year. Bob Harris just eclipsed the track record with a strong 7.67 second qualifying run. The former record held from last year's event at 7.70 by Ricky Smith. So we've got a fast track, perfect weather conditions, and the Mountain Motor Nationals this year ought to be nothing short of spectacular. All right, the next pair coming up for a qualifying attempt in this first session. In the far lane, the right side of the track, it'll be Animal Jim Foyer from St. Louis, Missouri, in one of the biggest motors in the history of drag racing, a 672 cubic inch Arias Ford. His opponent in this qualifying session in the left lane will be Charlie Buck from rural Retreat, Virginia. Charlie driving a Chevrolet. All right, the crews picking out the sticky portions of the racetrack to line up their race cars. Traction is very important in these qualifying sessions. Again, Animal Jim Foyer, St. Louis, Missouri, right lane, and a Ford. Charlie Buck from Virginia in the left lane, driving a Chevrolet. The number one qualifying spot right now stands with Bob Harris's strong 767. Charlie Buck moves first, and Animal Jim Foyer in a giant wheel stand. He certainly got traction that time. Jim Foyer will have to abort that run as the car got into a violent wheel stand, settling down a little crooked. He shut it off and just kind of rolled it through easily. So Bob Harris's #1 qualifying spot stands right now with 7.67. A brand new driver in the Pro Stock ranks. Bill Eyring from Glen Burnie, Maryland, driving the Igor Camaro. Eyring, a speed shop operator in Glen Burnie, making his first attempt at Pro Stock racing after a long and successful career in the ET brackets. Also up for a qualifying run in the right lane, this time from Vienna, Virginia, driving another Camaro, late model Camaro, the team of Richard and Leo Clark. The Clarks started out Pro Stock racing about 2 years ago, have been very successful on a limited budget, looking for a qualifying spot in this year's Mountain Motor Nationals. Eyring leaving first, and again, drivers are not too concerned about a good start during qualifying. They're strictly racing against the clocks, but Leo Clark closes up the gap to qualify with a 7.95, putting him right now in the #2 qualifying spot. Bill Eyring's early run of 8:47 puts him on the board. Charlie Rogers in another Virginia car moving up next in a Camaro. Charlie has qualified in prior Mountain Motor Nationals. His last qualifying spot was 2 years ago, where he went out in the first round to Dyno Don Nicholson. A new chance, a new car. Here comes Charlie Rogers in his first qualifying attempt of the day. And pulling up now in the right lane from Sophia, North Carolina, one of the hottest Pro Stock drivers of the year, Roy Hill, who recently set a national record of over 189 miles an hour in the Pro Stock class. So Roy Hill will be making his first qualifying attempt alongside Charlie Rogers. Hill driving the budget rent-a-car Ford Motorsports Mercury Capri. Hill running an engine slightly over 600 cubic inches, while Charlie Rogers is sticking to the more conventional 500 cubic inch Chevrolet motor. Remember, right now, #1 qualifying spot still remains a 7.67 by Bob Harris, and a real surprise in the early qualifying rounds. A good start for both cars. Roy Hill leaving with the front end up in the air. Roy Hill across first, and here we go with another #1 qualifying spot, a 7.55 at 182 miles an hour, and that looks like it might be the time to beat. Roy Hill taking over #1 qualifying spot. All right, more action coming up in the Pro Stock qualifying. This time from Middlesex, North Carolina, Harold Denton driving the Party Time car. The Party Time car owned by Jim Ruth of Moorhead, Kentucky. It's a 1984 Camaro. Harold Denton making his burnouts, warming up the tires, now moving into the left lane. From Chicago, Illinois, the team of Gary Stewart and Bob Olson, their first East Coast appearance. This Midwest car spending most of its time racing on the UDRA circuit in the Midwest. That's the United Drag Racers Association. So most East Coast fans will be getting their first look at Gary Stewart's beautiful Camaro. All right, Harold Denton, right lane. Gary Stewart and Bob Olson in the left lane on their first qualifying shot, and Gary Stewart is off like a shot. Gary Stewart out front. Harold Denton having a little problem at mid-range. He shuts it down, and here we go. Another #1 qualifying spot and a new track record at 7.42, 182 miles an hour. And more important than a track record, that run was the quickest run ever recorded by a Pro Stock car. Bob Olson driving Gary Stewart's Camaro to a 7.42, 182 miles an hour. Well, qualifying far from over yet in this first round. More action coming up. In the right lane, Sam Carroll driving an unusual-looking Monte Carlo Chevrolet. It's called the Unknown. Carroll, another North Carolina driver, will be moving into the right lane for a qualifying attempt. Sam has not had great luck with this Monte Carlo recently. It puts on a terrific show for the fans, but the elapsed times are not what he hopes it would be. He has been driving another car, and here comes the Monte Carlo. You see why it's been so popular. Wheels up start, but down on horsepower slightly at the finish line. Sam Carroll qualifying with an 8.43 at 160 miles an hour. We'll be back in just a few moments to take a trip down to the pit area and meet some of the drivers in competition tonight after these messages. We're here in the pits with a gentleman who drives the only Mercury Pro Stock car in the country right now, the budget motorcraft rent-a-car Mercury, Mr. Roy Hill from Sophia, North Carolina. Roy, welcome to the Mountain Motor Nationals.
Thank you, Todd. It's real nice to be here. We're looking forward to tonight and feel like it's going to be a good race for us.
Good, Roy. Well, I'll tell you, at one point, it was rumored that you may have bought some stock in this racetrack here. It seems like the beginning of the Pro Stock races was a clean sweep for Roy Hill. How did that come about?
We were real lucky, and back then the Chrysler cars, which I was running a Chrysler product then, I think it was a Plymouth Duster, had some power over some of the Chevrolets and Oldsmobiles. Now it's more even. Now the Chevrolets have got power over the Chrysler cars, the Mercurys, the Fords, but possibly here tonight we've got a big change coming around. We come in here the first 2 or 3 years and won this race, and everything was going our way. And we've done a lot of experimenting the past 3 months. We just set a new world record, 189.07 in Milan, Michigan with this Mercury Capri. And we feel like it's going to run mighty good. Matter of fact, that's the motor we've got in tonight, is the one that run almost 190, and we're shooting for 190 tonight here.
Well, of course, we're all hoping to see the first 190-mile-an-hour Pro Stock run tonight. Roy, I know one of the key ingredients to your success and to any fast race car success is corporate sponsorship. And, boy, I'll tell you, this is a glamorous display of what corporate sponsorship can do. How did all this come about?
Well, it took a lot of work. I picked up Lincoln Mercury a couple of years ago. And last year, sometime about the middle of the year, I was sitting in the corporate office in Detroit and seen a lot of paperwork that had Budget's name on it, and we got to talking about it, and I said, this is a perfect in. You know, why isn't Budget in racing? And so we went to work on Budget Rent-A-Car. And here we are today with Budget Rent-A-Car, and it's just been super for us through the year. What this does is get Budget's name out in areas that they don't normally see Budget's name in. I mean, in racing, you never see Budget Rent-A-Car. Once in a while, you see some kind of budget car or something sitting around, but this has just been perfect. It's got a lot of exposure, news, TV, radio, newspaper exposure, and it's just been good, and they're real excited about it, and you'll see them here again next year.
Great, Roy. Well, we're happy to have you here and wish you the best of luck tonight.
Thank you, Todd.
Every race has to have a hometown favorite, and here at Maryland International Raceway, the hometown favorite has to be Bob Harris from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Bob driving an '84 Pontiac Trans Am at today's race. Welcome to the race, Bob.
Thank you, Todd.
You know, a little earlier we talked to Roy Hill and got a glimpse of what corporate sponsorship does to pro stock racing, and I know you're running an independent operation. What kind of problems does that pose for you, Bob?
Well, it's pretty tough to work a job and try to pay for the car and run it too, but we're trying real hard at it, and we're looking for sponsors right now, too.
Well, I hope you can capture one. So how has the season gone so far for you without all that corporate sponsorship?
We've been running all the IHRA races, and we've been doing pretty good in that. We got a new car this year, and we're real happy with the way it's going this year.
Well, Bob, what about performances? What has been your best run so far?
We've been 760s at 185 mile an hour.
Well, 760s ought to make the field at just about any race. Where have you been qualifying? How do you stack up against the rest of the competition?
At the beginning of the year, we were like 13th, 14th, and we're up to like 9th and 10th now. We hope to do better at the next race, be in the top 8.
Well, obviously, 9th or 10th is not the most ideal position to be in a 16-car field.
No, it's not. But
in case you are wondering, the 9th and 10th qualifiers race against the 1st and 2nd qualifiers in the opening rounds. Bob, what do you think about tonight's race? This is your hometown track. You've had a lot of experience running on this one. Any predictions?
Well, I think it's going to be a real good race. I don't know who's going to win. I think we're going to give it a good try, though.
Well, good luck, Bob. We'll be cheering for you.
Okay. Thank you, Todd.
You know, for most of the professionals here at the races, it's nothing but hard work to get these cars running, but for the rest of us, it's a big party time, and that's the name of the car we're at now. Harold Denton, the driver from Middlesex, North Carolina. Harold, where did that name come from?
That's Jim Roos's outfit that started the deal with Party Time. They just decided to get together and have a pro stock car, and that was a couple years ago. He's got a little more serious about it now, but it still goes along with the type of people they like to do a whole lot of partying. And of course, when it comes to racing, if you can't win, he says, let's party. Up at Bristol, he lost first round, so he hired a band to come in. We sit up on the back of the tailgate.
Of course, we're talking about Jim Ruth from Moorhead, Kentucky, the owner of the car, and that's quite an interesting story in itself. Jim Ruth owns the car. Here's Harold Denton driving, and yet I see Jim Ruth's name in the point standings. What's the deal there, Harold?
Jim decided to help me with the car after I had wrecked mine last year, and at the same time we were working together a little at different races as far as trying to help him keep the car running. So he said, how about just take the car and you drive it all in match racing, and I'll just run a few of these IHRA points races. And So far, it's worked out real good. We've had a real good year. We've had about 5 separate tracks that we set the record at, and we've done at probably 75% winning in the match race circuit so far with about 20 races.
Well, Harold, I know that Jim is relatively new to pro stock racing. If I'm not mistaken, you've got about a little over 20 years of racing behind you. How have you two compared? Who's doing a better job this year? Remember, you're talking about the boss now.
Well, I have to give him credit for being better than I am with 2 years' experience, but naturally I feel like I'm a little better, and at times we do talk about the car would probably run a little quicker if I was driving it, but you know, when you look at the years I've had of driving, that just means one thing. As some of the younger ones tell me, I'll be late once in a while too.
Well, Harold, I hope today isn't one of those times, and I hope it's a real party time for you at the end of the race. Good luck.
Thank you.
A far contrast from the pro stock cars are the more economical Super Stakes class ET bracket cars that we'll also be seeing tonight. A giant field of more than 170 of the Super Pro cars is entered. The Super Pro car is a budget race car with rules far more flexible than for the professional cars. It allows racers to compete according to their budgets, and speed isn't always the criteria for winning. The ET bracket rules that govern this class provide for a head start for the slower cars that equalizes the competition. Right now, we're watching a number of the cars make their practice and qualifying runs in the early part of the day. The main reason for the time trial runs, in addition to tuning and preparing their cars, is to baseline the elapsed times on their cars. The baseline becomes very critical during the competition later this evening. The ET bracket rules, in order to equalize the competition, require every driver to choose a handicap, in effect to predict what his performance will be during the next race. The difference between those handicaps in time is the amount of head start given to the slower car in each race. For example, a car that's capable of turning the quarter mile in 12 seconds flat would probably choose a 12-second handicap. If he were to race against a 13-second car, he'd be giving that car a 1-second head start. The determining factor in winning the race here is how quick your reflexes are on the starting line. The drivers stage very carefully at the line. The electronic starting system, known as a Christmas tree, begins its countdown, and when the green light flashes, the cars take off. The green light will flash the exact amount of delay in the handicap for the slower car ahead of the faster car. And then it's the first car to reach the finish line, the winner, provided that car doesn't run quicker than his chosen handicap. The term used then is a breakout. Breakout means that a driver went too quick for his class. This prevents the cheating, or sandbagging as it's called in the racing terms. The cars in the Super Pro competition will cover a wide variety of vehicles. Here, a pair of conventional cars up to the line. The Showtime Camaro, Darren Terzi in the right lane, against the Honey Hush Camaro. Camaro's being a very popular car for this Super Pro class. However, it's not limited to full-body cars. A number of the dragsters, altered roadsters, Model T roadsters will be in competition with these cars tonight. High drivers are anticipating the start of the electronic starting system now, and they'll be off on another time trial run. Most of the cars in competition in this Super Pro class will be using full automatic transmissions. The automatic transmission has proven far more reliable and consistent in this type racing, and consistency is of the utmost importance. Some of the smoke you'll be seeing from time to time on the starting line is a venerable procedure in drag racing known as the burnout. The burnout is a method used by drivers to warm up those giant racing tires on the rear of the car to make them softer, more pliable, and stickier when they get to the starting line. Wheel spin can cost you a race in a hurry. The drivers will take great pains in warming up those tires to the point that the rubber becomes very soft. The course the drivers are running on is a measured quarter mile, 1,320 feet from start to finish. The minimum time required to enter the Super Stakes class is 11.99 seconds or quicker. Most of the cars in the field are well into the tens. No one wants to be the slowest car and have everyone catching up on them. One of the popular theories or strategies used in this class is to be a quicker car and pace yourself. In other words, know where the other car is on the racetrack. Come up from behind and take just as much wind as you need to prevent yourself from falling into that breakout situation we discussed earlier. Drivers entered tonight in that 170-car field cover a big area from the eastern shore of Maryland and the Delaware areas all the way down into the Carolinas. A heavy concentration of cars participating at Maryland International Raceway every week, of course, coming from the Washington, D.C. and the Baltimore area. And in addition to the large cash purses, the Super Stakes drivers are also in competition for points to earn their way into the National Hot Rod Association's bracket finals at the end of the summer. The bracket finals this year will be held in Reading, Pennsylvania at the end of September. And every participating racetrack on the East Coast will be allowed to send its 8 best cars in each of 4 classes of competition, plus 8 motorcycles. The drivers then compete as a team against the other racetracks for team honors as well as individual competition honors. And a large percentage of the last 5 or 6 years of the bracket finals competition has seen cars from the Washington and Baltimore area victorious. Maryland International Raceway right now leads all other tracks in total individual wins and has been a past team champion. We might point out at this time that ET bracket racing is for everyone. The classes are open for anyone to enter that has an automobile. While we're looking at the cream of the crop now, or the top of the line bracket racers called the Super Pros, the classes begin down at the lowest stock level. 4-cylinder Volkswagens, Toyotas, and many of the American import cars do compete on that handicap basis, so competition is equalized, and it has become a very popular participant sport as well as an enormous spectator sport over the last few years. On the starting line now, one of the former national champions in the Super Pro class, Bob Maxey from Clinton, Maryland, in the Pontiac Aster. Maxey probably one of the pioneers of ET bracket racing. He figured it out and reduced it to a science long before the rest of the drivers ever knew what ET bracket racing was all about. It gave him a big head start. Bob Maxey, with that home-built race car, has won as much as $18,000 in a single season racing the Pontiac Aster. Motorcycle drag racing has become a big influence in the sport in recent years with the popularity of the two-wheelers. In addition to all the normal street bikes, a lot of the well-prepared, specially designed drag racing vehicles have been showing up in great numbers lately. Here are a couple of the versions of the drag bikes are on the starting line ready for their time trial practice runs. Notice they're all using the long wheelie bars behind the rear wheel to prevent the bikes from turning over backwards on acceleration. A number of the standard street-equipped motorcycles are now capable of running the quarter mile in the 11-second bracket, and a couple of the fully prepared drag bikes have exceeded 200 miles an hour in almost 7 seconds flat for the quarter mile. We'll be back with more racing action from Maryland International Raceway after this message from Speed Unlimited Performance Centers. Time trials are over, qualifying is closed, and we're ready to move into the first round of Mountain Motor Nationals eliminations for 1984. And the first pairing will match Dyno Don Nicholson from Orange, California, in the Oldsmobile in the far lane, taking on Baltimore's Bill Eyring in the Igor Camaro. Prior to the start of eliminations, we had a chance to talk to one of the legends in drag racing, Dyno Don Nicholson, down in the pit area.
You know, every sport has its legend, and drag racing is no different. And it's really an honor to be next to a legend in his own time, and I don't use that very lightly. Don Nicholson, the man we call Dyno Don from Orange, California. Don, welcome to the Mountain Motor Nationals.
Thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure being here again.
Don, you know, you've been around racing for as long as I remember when I was a little kid, I was your fan. And tell me the truth. How long have you been racing now?
Well, I've been racing about 40 years, I guess, but we've been full-time professional racing about 25.
Well, it's a marvelous record you've amassed, too, I might add. But listen, you know, you're a crowd favorite here. We hear the fans just screaming for you every time you come to the line. But we're used to seeing you in a Ford for so many years. What's the story here with this car?
Well, we got out of the Ford there for a while. You know, we kind of retired for a couple of years, and a guy come to me with this Oldsmobile, wanted me to run it, and here we are.
Well, what is the end result? Are you satisfied with it?
Well, we've had a lot of problems. We expected to be here with a little better motor, like a 615-incher, and we had trouble with it. Now we only got a 500-incher, so it's going to be tough.
Well, Don, if anyone can handle a tough job, it's the Dyno man. And Don, best of luck tonight. We'll be cheering for you.
Thank you.
Back to the starting line, where Bill Eyring of Baltimore, Maryland, in the red Camaro gets his first test of pro racing against Dyno Don Nicholson, and what a test it'll be. One of the craftiest veterans in the sport in the right lane. Dyno Don with the Olds, and they're off. Bill Eyring getting a slight jump on Dyno Don. At the finish line, the Oldsmobile's horsepower is starting to take over. Dyno Don takes the win in the first round with a 7.82, 171 miles an hour, losing time for Eyring in 8:43. And here comes Animal Jim Foyer from St. Louis, Missouri. And prior to the race, we had a chance to meet with Animal Jim in his first trip east.
Right down in the pits again after second round of qualifying, this time taking a look at the car of Animal Jim Foyer from St. Louis, Missouri. And boy, when we said this was a mountain motor race, we had no idea the mountains grew that big. Jim, welcome to Maryland and the Mountain Motor Nationals. What do you think so far?
Well, I love this place. Think I might move here.
Oh, great. We'd love to have you. Now, listen, Jim, when we talk about the mountain motors, everyone talks about these big motors that are up over 500 cubic inches. This has got to be the Himalayas of all mountain motors. What's the story on that big motor?
Well, that's the new Ford SVO pieces that are available from Arius. And John Cossey and I got together and dreamed this one up. And it's 5-inch stroke with a 4 5/8-inch bore. But they're all aftermarket pieces patterned after the 429 Ford.
Well, now for the rest of us who can't calculate that quickly, how big is that?
That's 672 inches.
672. Never heard of anything that big. Well, Jim, you had your first taste of mountain motor racing. You're in the field. Good luck in tonight's eliminations.
I'm looking forward to it. This time we'll squeeze on her just a little harder.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Back to the starting line with Jim Foyer and the Justice brothers from McLean, Virginia. Here's the test for the St. Louis driver in the left lane with the big motor. And Jim Foyer was late leaving. The Justice brothers, the dark horse in the race, getting out in front. And at the finish line, it's too late for Foyer. The Justice brothers get there first in the Plymouth with an 8.77 elapsed time, and Foyer running a quicker 8.74, having trouble. All right, next pair coming up, it's Sam Carroll in the unknown. The unique Monte Carlo Chevrolet moving into the left lane, and in the right lane from Illinois, the team that set the national record or eclipsed what was the national record and a new track record here at MIR, the team of Gary Stewart and Bob Olson. And we had a chance to meet with those fellows from Illinois a little earlier in the pit area. Let's move down there to meet the fellows up close.
All right, down in the pits after an exciting first round of qualifying that saw record after record shattered in this year's Mountain Motor Nationals, and the gentleman who really set the world on their ear in a quickest run ever at this track, and as far as I know, just about anywhere, the team of Gary Stewart and Bob Olson from the Chicago area. Bob, what happened? Here we were looking at a 7:55 run from Roy Hill, which we kind of expected, and out of nowhere comes Gary Stewart and Bob Olson and a new record.
Well, we've done some changes before we come to this race, and it's a new motor, and we tuned the motor up a bit, and I guess everything we did, we expected it to go as fast as we've ever done, and, everything kind of fell into place, and it was just a good run.
Well, we know you expected it. You caught us off guard. Gary, how's the season been going? We haven't heard that much about you on the East Coast. We're glad to see you get out this way.
Well, thank you. We run to that UDRA circuit back in the Midwest an awful lot. And this is a brand new car, and the chassis didn't get done in time as soon as we thought, so we missed darn near half the season. We didn't get out till June. And then we broke our motor that was our base motor, so we real quick put this 615-inch motor together, and things just fell in place ever since then. The chassis is working real well, and everything, like Bob said, is just falling together for us.
Well, I'll say it's fallen together with a track record now. I noticed on the second qualifying attempt you pulled off the line. What was the trouble there?
We don't know. Something broke in the car. We lost a cylinder. We went through the rocker arms and everything. Everything seems to be okay. Looks like maybe we have a gasoline problem. We ran out of fuel, so we got to check the fuel pumps and do a few things like that.
Well, it didn't hurt you so bad so far. Still holding on to that #1 qualifying spot. Bob, what do you think? Has the car got more in it?
Well, as the night air rolls in, I think everybody's going to go faster, and of course we're looking to go faster too.
Well, unusual conditions with the weather today. I would say just as close to ideal as you could ask for. How about the track surface? How are we looking there?
Track feels real good. I understand that they've sprayed some traction compound down the track, and that really helps these cars because with the lightweight that they are and the high horsepower, they need all the traction they can get. And track's real good, except for down in the far end, but most of the ET is in where the track is sprayed, so that's probably accounting for most of the fast ETs here.
Well, we're thrilled to see some new blood here at the Mountain Motor Nationals this year, and I mean, you did it in great style. Best of luck to both of you.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate being here.
Back at the starting line, and it's do or die time for Sam Carroll, the North Carolina driver in the Monte Carlo, up against the toughest man in the country right now, Bob Olson in the Gary Stewart car from Chicago, Illinois. Drivers carefully moving into the staging beams for the first round of eliminations. And they're off. Sam Carroll jumping into a big wheel stand. He's got problems, but he did leave earlier. Let's see if Stewart can straighten it out. A tight one at the finish line. Gary Stewart in the right lane with Bob Olson at the wheel taking the win. And listen to this, with a slower time of 7.95. Sam Carroll got there with a 7.92. The whole shot didn't quite work. All right, moving up to another pair. Drivers in the water box doing the burnouts, getting their tires warmed up. This time it'll be Roy Hill in the budget rent-a-car Mercury Capri. He's from Sophia, North Carolina, taking on Leo Clark from Vienna, Virginia, driving a Camaro. Clark in the near lane. During qualifying, Clark finished in the number 10 spot, Hill in the number 2 qualifying position. Ready to go racing, first round of the Mountain Motor Nationals, and again Leo Clark putting a whole shot on Roy Hill. He leaves first, but the horsepower in the Mercury Capri starting to show at the bottom end. Roy Hill taking the win in the right lane with an incredible 7.57 second elapsed time at over 183 miles an hour. Clark slightly off pace on the run with an 8:08 at 162. Harold Denton up next now with the Party Time Camaro. He'll be in the far lane taking on the Delano and Otto team in a Camaro in the near lane. Roy Hill finishing in the number 2 qualifying position with his 7:55 blast earlier in the day. Harold Denton finished number 5. He'll be taking on the number 13 qualifier, the Camaro, Delano and Otto. Harold Denton getting an easy win, 7:65 at 179 miles an hour. The hometown favorite, Bob Harris, moving up now. Pontiac Trans Am. He'll be in the far lane. Bob looked mighty good in qualifying. He opened up the qualifying session, breaking the existing track record with a 7:67. It was then, of course, lowered twice more, but Bob Harris looking pretty good. This is his closest he's ever come to being right in the front runner's circle. He's appeared at 4 Mountain Motor Nationals in the past, going out in the first or second round. Let's see if he can move up the ladder just a little bit. He'll be taking on Charlie Buck from Rural Retreat, Virginia. Buck driving the Chevrolet in the near lane. Pontiac and Chevrolet battle coming up. Charlie Buck making his best showing here at the Mountain Motor Nationals with a number 11 qualifying position, but he's got his work cut out for him. And Bob Harris shooting out all alone. Charlie Buck had a lot of problems in the pits. He spent a lot of time working on the car, and it looks like the work didn't help him a bit. A drive line problem keeps him on the starting line. Bob Harris with a good 7:67 at 181.08 miles per hour. Back to the action on the starting line again, and a little break in the Pro Stock racing as Bob Hall's bringing his paddy wagon Chevy Vega up to the starting line. A paddy wagon, strictly an exhibition car, not in competition here tonight, but adding a little spice to the show for the fans. And a full house of fans at this Mountain Motor Nationals. And there goes Bob Hall in the paddy wagon up on 2 wheels. And holding it on 2 wheels with sparks trailing from the rear bumper as the paddy wagon goes through the entire quarter mile in 10.20 seconds at over 139 miles an hour. All right, back to the Pro Stock racing action again. We're ready for second round of competition, starting out with Lee Dean from Rising Sun, Maryland, the newcomer to the Pro Stock ranks who squeezed by his first round. He's driving a Pontiac. He'll be taking on another Pontiac from Chevy Chase, Maryland, Bob Harris. Harris looking better and better as the night goes on. Followed up his quick qualifying attempt with a 7.67. Lee Dean with his best effort ever, a number 7 qualifying spot for the Maryland driver. So we're moving into an all-Maryland clash here in the second round of competition. Both drivers moving their way back into the water burnout area. Again, they'll spin those tires in the water at extreme high RPM to warm them up. They lock the front brakes while they're going through the procedure. All right, Lee Dean out of the water first. Bob Harris sending up a smoke cloud in the far lane. All right, neither of these drivers has advanced past the second round in mountain motor competition here at Maryland International Raceway over the years. So for one of them, it's going to be a step forward. Again, Harris from Chevy Chase, Maryland. The overwhelming crowd favored as far as the local fans are concerned. All right, Harris into the staging lights first. Lee Dean slowly moving his way up, and then he'll bring the RPM up to about 8,000 or 9,000 before dropping the clutch. They're off, and Lee Dean did just what he had to do. He had to take a chance on the starting line, and he left too early with a red light. And look at this, Bob Harris coming from behind anyway on the red light start to take the win. Bob Harris clocking a 7.72 with his best speed ever, 184.23 miles an hour. Lee Dean's losing time, a creditable 7.92, and the safety crew beginning to run now. It looks like Lee Dean lost control down in the shutoff area, and the car might be in trouble. All right, the starting tower turning the red light warnings on at the starting line, stopping all action for a few moments while we check up on the condition of the driver at the finish line. Well, after some delay on the racetrack and clearing up the debris, we get word that the driver, Lee Dean, involved in the accident was transported to a nearby hospital. His condition does not seem to be serious. We hope we'll have more information before the race is over. Meanwhile, it's Charlie Garrett from Central Pennsylvania taking on the Justice brothers. James Justice driving the Plymouth in the near lane from McLean, Virginia. Garrett driving a Camaro into second round of competition. Justice squeaked through in the first round. Now he's got his hands full. Garrett's Camaro doing extremely well in the last couple of months of competition on the circuit. And Garrett from start to finish taking the win. The Justice brothers going down to defeat with an 8.78 as Garrett comes up with a strong 7.78 at 176 miles an hour. And now it's party time. Harold Denton in the party time Camaro moving into the far lane for his second round match against Bob Olson and Gary Stewart. Normally, a clear-cut favorite would be the Gary Stewart car, but he had a lot of trouble in the previous round. Stewart only going through with a 7.95, while Harold Denton is certainly capable of some 770s. Well, now we'll find out if the Stewart and Olson crew have solved their problems of the first round. It's race time, party time. Harold Denton from North Carolina, right lane. Gary Stewart and Bob Olson from Chicago, Illinois in the near lane. A good even start. No calling the difference between that one. Hey, this one's a run from wire to wire. Gary Stewart and Bob Olson in the left lane, the closest run of the night. Stewart with a 7.72, Harold Denton with a 7.74. 2/100ths of a second difference between the two cars. Denton with a better speed on the run at 180 miles an hour. Stewart shutting down early with 169. Final run in the second round of competition. This is the one a lot of folks have been waiting for. Two old crafty veterans coming up here now. Roy Hill, the budget rent-a-car Mercury Capri, and Dyno Don Nicholson in the Olds. Roy Hill, remember, the number 2 qualifier for the night. So Dyno's got his work cut out for him now. Hill has to be the favorite going into this run. We heard Don Nicholson telling us earlier that he didn't get a chance to put the big mountain motor together that he'd like for this race. He's still running with one of his legal 500 cubic inch motors, while you can be sure that Roy Hill's mountain motor is well over 600 cubic inches. All right, the starter motioning for Don Nicholson to move up to the line. Hill is ready in the far lane. All right, Hill moves into the stage beam. Nicholson inching his way up right now. Off on a good even start. Roy Hill ought to have the power, but Roy Hill starting to get crossed up. The budget rent-a-car Mercury moving from side to side. It slows him down enough to let Don Nicholson go through with the Oldsmobile taking the win with a 782, 175 miles an hour. Roy Hill had to shut it down to keep from turning it over. He goes through with an 896 at 109 miles an hour. Well, that sets the stage for the semifinals, and while the starting line crew does a little housework tuning up the racetrack, we'll take a break and hear from our friends at Speed Unlimited. All right, Tod Mack back at trackside again, moving into semifinal action in the Mountain Motor Nationals here at Maryland International Raceway, where Bob Harris, the local hero, has his work cut out for him now. He'll take on Gary Stewart and Bob Olson in this semifinal round. And the competition gets tighter as the night goes on. The cool air is starting to move in, too, which might work out to their advantage or hindrance here, depending on how much moisture comes down on the racetrack from this cool air. We'll find out in just moments. Camaro against Pontiac. Bob Harris driving the Pontiac in the right lane. Gary Stewart and Bob Olson in the near lane. All right, Bob Harris facing the biggest test of his racing career now against the fastest man in the world, we've come to find out. And the lights are on. A good even start. This one's anybody's race. It's all horsepower from here on in. Wind light coming on in the right lane to the delight of the Maryland fans. Bob Harris in a super close race, a 7.65 for Harris, 7.68 losing time for Bob Olson and Gary Stewart. So it'll be a long ride home to Chicago tonight. Top speeds on the run for Harris, 180.36. For Stewart, 180.00. So Bob Harris moving into the final of the Mountain Motor Nationals. And for a Pro Stock driver, that's about as good as it gets. All right, the next semifinal run coming up, Charlie Garrett from Pennsylvania. He'll be in the far side in the Trans Am. Garrett will be facing the all-time favorite here at MIR, Dyno Don Nicholson in an Oldsmobile. Nicholson will be in the near lane. Dyno Don from Orange, California, makes his summer residence here on the East Coast in Atlanta, Georgia, where years back, Don had a dyno chassis shop where he picked up the name Dyno Don from work on dynamometer service. And the drivers are ready. They're coming out of the water box, warming up those big tires. It's just moments away from race time, and we're going to find out who takes on Bob Harris in the finals of this Mountain Motor Nationals Classic. Don Nicholson just squeezed by Roy Hill in the prior round to earn his way into the semifinals with a 7.82, while Charlie Garrett ran a 7.78. We've got about 4/100ths of a second difference right now between the two cars, favoring Garrett. Garrett moving up first. He's into the pre-stage beam. He'll wait for Don Nicholson to move all the way up before he moves another foot. All right, looks like we got a waiting game here, part of the psychology of racing. Hey, Don, you go first. I don't want to stage. No, I'll just sit here and wait a while. All right, Charlie Garrett finally makes the first move. Here comes Dyno Don. RPM is up, and Dyno Don leaves too soon. Nicholson draws a red light start on the starting line. The win automatically going to Charlie Garrett, and he gets there first anyway with a 7.69, shutting off early at 179 miles an hour. Don Nicholson, another 7.82 at 171.75. Well, we're down to the finals of the 1984 Mountain Motor Nationals. And before we finish up tonight's race, this is Tod Mack wanting to offer my thanks to the DBF crew for their excellent production work on the coverage of this event, and inviting you back here to MIR on Saturday, September 15th for the 280-mile-an-hour Jet Funny Car Nationals. We'll be here covering this race also. All right, the finals coming down to Bob Harris from Chevy Chase, Maryland, and Charlie Garrett from Central Pennsylvania. And this one is for all the marbles. Garrett will be in the near lane. Interesting matchup coming up in this finals now. Bob Harris in his best effort ever in Pro Stock racing. Harris ran a 7.65 in the semifinals. Garrett ran a 7.69. Again, we're down to 4/100ths of a second separating these cars on past performance. The Bob Harris crew very excited over there in the far lane. This is the kind of race they've dreamed about. They want to win a big one once in their career, and what a better way to do it than right at home in front of their hometown fans. Charlie Garrett just recently won one of the big mountain motor races in Richmond, Virginia last month. He's kind of riding high and doing some excellent racing here lately. All right, just seconds away from the final go of the Mountain Motor Nationals. Bob Harris far side, Charlie Garrett in the near lane. They're off. It looks like Bob Harris moving slightly ahead of Garrett. Racing toward the finish line. Bob Harris, the Chevy Chase driver, taking his first major win, and a win here at home at the Mountain Motor Nationals to wrap up a great night of racing under beautiful skies and the capacity crowd trying to work its way out of Budds Creek, Maryland right now. Again, we hope you'll be back here on September 15th for the Jet Funny Car Nationals. This is Tod Mack saying good night from Maryland International Raceway.